This was planned. There was malice. This is a person who came to this house with a deranged mind.
A brutal killing.
She was controlled.
His mission was to destroy both of them.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
This is a very personal murder.
He's going to be in charge. He's going to be in control and never be told no. You're dealing with someone who's a complete psychopath.
A stalker is like having your own personal terrorist assigned to you.
The truth will be revealed.
It was chilling that someone's out there that can do this kind of thing.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. East Cobb, an affluent suburb located just north of Atlanta.
It's a community that's really centered around families. It's known for having good schools, so people move there a lot for that reason. It's low crime, and it's considered a really safe area.
But days before Halloween, this quiet community is shocked by a real-life horror.
It came through as a 911 call. A little 5-year-old boy came home from school, and he was stabbed about 18 times in his chest. When you hear of a child who's injured by somebody, you're more with your foot through the firewall, driving as hard as fast as you can to get there.
As detectives arrive on scene, 5-year-old Nick Smith is rushed to the trauma center.
He was with a neighbor girl, Christina, who lived upstairs.
She said they saw a shadow pass by the door. Assuming it was his mother, Nick ran into the room where a person grabbed him from behind and began violently stabbing him in the chest. Christina wasn't able to really give us any identifying features. It was such a traumatic event for her, hearing the screams, that she literally ran out of the house.
What could this little 5-year-old, 60-pound boy have done to anybody to have deserved to have been stabbed repeatedly in the chest in such a violent situation?
Cobb County detectives Randy Harris, John Dawes, and Major Crimes Prosecutor Jesse Evans begin investigating the vicious assault.
It was an older residence in an established neighborhood. You walk around the back side of the house, you see this sliding glass door that accesses the basement from the back. Is there a suspect still in the house? What else is going on? Has anybody else been injured? The two things that stood out the most were the broken knife blade, separated from its handle. That was the weapon covered in blood, obviously used in stabbing Nick. We were able to determine that that knife blade didn't match the cutlery that Carmen Smith had in her apartment. And in the bedroom, the carpet showed Nick's blood where he was initially stabbed. And in the bed was 5 layers of bedding. It didn't look right, so the officers pulled the bedding back on one side. And there lies the lifeless body of Nick's mom, Carmen Smith. It's heart-wrenching. to be involved in a case like this. And there's extra pressure and stress to try to find out who did it.
Police must uncover the details of the pair's final day.
Establishing a timeline as it relates to the victim and the last hours of that person's life, critical in any investigation. It generally opens the doors for the detectives first to understand the lifestyle of the deceased. And from that, you will draw the information to try to solve the crime.
Carmen was a beautiful, young, strawberry blonde.
She had a lot of friends and she was outgoing.
She's a loving mother. She absolutely devotes her time to her son, Nicholas. She's there for him. She takes care of him. She does everything that she can. Just a good mom. She's also a flight attendant. So she can be gone for a day or two or three at a time, depending on her schedule. She's a different victim because when she's home, she's with her kid. And when she's working, she's out of state flying. We want to know her routine. Did she go someplace where someone may have been checking her out?
They look to establish Carmen's time of death.
Nick got home at about 3 o'clock from school, and the rigor mortis, the lividity, Carmen clearly had been dead for a number of hours. Everything told us that her death had occurred in the morning.
That's significant. The assault on Nick didn't happen until much later, hours after she was killed and placed in the bed.
The time frame between taking Carmen's life and then assaulting Nick the way he was assaulted was just odd.
He intentionally waited on that child to come home because he could have left a long time earlier. So his mission was to destroy both of them.
You start by saying, who would want to do this to Carmen? Who would want to do this to Nick?
I'll be honest, I just couldn't think of a reason why a 5-year-old would be attacked.
Detectives work the crime scene and examine Carmen's injuries for clues to the identity of her attacker.
You collect anything and everything that could be evidence, blood or hair or any other forensic evidence, phone records. In that time, it took weeks, months to get the phone records. There were marks on her wrist, bruising, that were parallel lines, very consistent with handcuffs.
She had an abrasion to her chin. It was an abrasion consistent with sort of carpet burns, or having been face down as the ligature was pulled tight against her neck. In addition to that, she had 2 small puncture wounds to her back, which would not be lethal, certainly would have been painful. The puncture wounds to her back were consistent with having been caused by an ice pick type instrument. And there was an out-of-place cord, almost like a cord that you would use for pulling some blinds back, that was there on the scene.
It didn't match anything in the downstairs of this residence or even upstairs. It may have been the weapon that was used to strangle the life from Carmen Smith.
We're talking about really 4 different weapons at a minimum here. You've got the ligature, you've got the knife that was used to stab Nick, you've got an ice pick, and you've got handcuffs that were being used to effectuate this crime as well. The fact that you have more than one instrumentality involved in causing the injuries to Carmen was pretty significant.
It's not a crime of opportunity. This was planned. There was intent. There was malice. This is a person who came to this house with a deranged mind and accomplished what he came to do. The scene itself told us that there had been control. She was under the physical control of handcuffs and some kind of torture going on from behind.
When you see a form of torture, there's a level of rage in there. So it starts to narrow down. This wasn't someone who broke into the house to steal the vault.
It was chilling that someone's out there that can do this kind of thing.
Police attempt to speak with Nick, hoping for a description of his assailant.
The child was rolled out on the gurney, and I saw a massive amount of blood on his upper torso, and overheard an emergency room trauma doctor asking him what had happened. And what I heard at that time was, "Bad man hit me with a wok," in a child's language. And that was telling to me that this child is not even old enough to know what had happened to him.
This little kid, adorable little kid, laying on a hospital bed, just medical hardware all over him, trying to fight for life. Nick fought and fought and fought.
Most people that sustain that type of wound don't survive. Fortunately, none of the vital organs were penetrated. The child would be in and out of consciousness, and he was heavily medicated and was recovering. I was going to hang with the kid, regardless of everything else. I was able to kind of let him know, hey, I'm your friend. He needed someone. I tried to reassure him it was going to be okay. I asked him, did you see who attacked you? Do you know what color his clothing was, which he described as black? Could you see his face? And he replied that he was wearing a mask, and the mask was the same color, black. He said, I want my mommy. It was heart-wrenching.
They need to locate Nick's father.
Mike Smith was the ex-husband of Carmen.
There are always automatic thoughts for a detective. One is Carmen in the victimology, recently divorced. So you begin to look at the ex-husband.
You hear there's a divorce. You hear, well, there may be anger, there may be rage.
Detectives learn Nick was supposed to be at his dad's house all weekend, until his mom picked him up unexpectedly.
Mike kept Nicholas when Carmen was out of town. We learned that a couple of days before Carmen's death, she was working. And she wasn't feeling well and came home a day earlier than her schedule had provided. She wasn't supposed to be home.
This means her killer likely knew about her last-minute change in schedule.
Mike Smith knew that she came home a day early because he was angry that she interrupted with his visitation. In any divorce situation, especially where there's a minor, the parent who doesn't get as much time suddenly doesn't have their kid to look at and talk to and play with every day of the week. They're upset. It's just a volatile situation. Emotions get out of control, and some people can't control themselves. People knew that there had been frustrations, knew there had been arguments, knew that there had been a lot of problems because of the divorce.
But the fact is, he could walk through that door of the hospital, and if he was our violent suspect, then I needed to know that.
Detectives identify Mike Smith as a person of interest in the brutal murder of his ex-wife, Carmen.
The hospital started telling me that there were visitors being received, family members, friends. In a lot of cases, somebody that means you to do harm will come to the hospital and try to finish what they started.
They track Mike down, and after a brief interview at the station, he's brought to the hospital.
His emotions are obviously at a high point. The main thing that came to us was studying Mike, backgrounding Mike, sitting down and talking to Mike, looking at his face. He acknowledged accurately the relationship, the cause of the breakdown, and everything that had been going on.
Mike tells detectives he spoke to Carmen by phone at 7:30 a.m. that morning, right after Nick left for school.
The interview of the last person to speak to the deceased is very important. It starts to narrow down the time of death. You learn from the last person generally the state of mind of the deceased.
Mike admits they argued on the phone.
Mike Smith was angry that she came home early and grabbed up Nick. Mike was going through a lot of emotional issues.
They did have some jealousies going on with dating new people and that sort of thing.
The motivator with Mike always comes back to the same thing for me. Do I think that Mike had concerns that Carmen was seeing another man and there was some jealousy there? Yes. Do I think that Mike would have had concern about another man being involved in his son's life? Yes, absolutely.
His familiarity with their home is another factor.
A large component of the investigation was how somebody got into the house. When police officers respond to the scene, they don't find that there's any forced entry. There's not a door that's been kicked in. There's not a broken window or anything like that. This is clearly somebody that's found their way into this crime scene and done so in a stealthy manner. We learned Mike would oftentimes come to the house and stay with Nick when Carmen was absent due to her work schedule.
He knew the house. He knew the inside of the house. He knew the outside of the house.
So you've got motive and you've got opportunity, but you need something else because beyond a reasonable doubt is a very high standard. So the police have to nail down that suspect's alibi, because if they can't nail down an alibi, that opens a crack through which the defense will drive a truck.
Mike had an alibi with work, but there was still a part of that day when he could have gone over there and committed a crime and left.
Alibis are very difficult at times to disprove. Police officers often work on gut feelings. So when you have a gut feeling, you have to pursue it. You know your case. You are living it, you're breathing it.
Police need to find another way to rule Mike in or out.
Law enforcement intentionally allowed him to see Nick because they wanted to gauge the demeanor between the two of them. If it was your loved one and you realized that something this horrible had happened to them, you would expect that there's going to be an emotional reaction. When you don't see that appropriate demeanor, that's a red flag.
I gave them space and their privacy, but I moved to a window where I could observe. And when that child woke up and reached up for his dad, at that moment in time, I said, he's not a suspect. If his father had had anything to do with that, he certainly wouldn't have expressed that kind of comfort. His dad was in tears, he was in tears.
Mike had a lot of difficulty with the divorce, but did he stab his son 18 times? No, not a chance.
Detectives get word that forensic analysis of the crime scene has turned up a new clue.
There were short black hairs on her body. So there was obvious personal contact from a person who didn't match Carmen's strawberry blonde hair or little Nick's solid white hair.
If you have a hair with the follicle attached, there is sufficient DNA for testing. The difference between good DNA and bad DNA is quality and quantity. Quality means that you want to have well-preserved DNA. It's not going to be degraded. Quantity would be having a sufficient number of cells in order to amplify the genetic material.
But in 1995, DNA were 3 letters that nobody knew what it meant. So even with a root the skin tissue involved at the end of a hair, it just wasn't enough from a scientific standpoint.
On a mission to determine who the hair belongs to, police interview people who had access to Carmen's home, starting with Carmen's upstairs neighbor, Lottie Spencer.
Lottie moved in a few months prior to the murder. She worked in a doctor's office and had a 10-year-old daughter.
Christina was a few years older than Nick, but they rode the bus together and stayed in the same house, different portions of the house. Lottie and Carmen did have a unique setup in that they were both happened to be single moms living in this same house. There's really no evidence to show that they had any really close relationship or anything like that. It was more of a roommate type situation, one renting the top portion and one renting the bottom portion.
Lottie tells police she left for work that morning just after 7 a.m., the same time Nick and Christina left to meet the school bus.
She had heard from her daughter, Christina, what had happened and left work early to go to the house to check on her daughter.
Lottie then reveals that Carmen's death may be somehow connected to an unstable individual from her past.
Lottie was able to articulate for us a pretty terrifying series of events that have been going on for almost a full year in her life. Lottie and Wasim Daker met playing paintball on the same team with each other. So they started off kind of getting to know each other in a social context.
She said that she had initially reached out to him and tried to be a friend. She was trying to be like a big sister to him because he was confiding problems at home.
At the time, Daker was a 17-year-old student at Georgia Tech University.
He started to become obsessed with her. He was going to her office. He was following her around to restaurants.
Pretty soon, she wanted a more hands-off relationship with him. She was becoming more concerned about his bizarre behavior. So it got to a point where he just wouldn't take no for an answer.
After repeated requests to be left alone, Lottie went to the police.
He was charged with harassing phone calls. There was a stalking charge against him. He was ordered to undergo some psychiatric treatment.
In the fall of 1995, Lottie was starting a new life in East Cobb and moves in with Carmen Smith.
Lottie had just learned that Daker had been released from a hospital.
He was free to do whatever he wanted to. He's a stalker. And a stalker is like having your own personal terrorist assigned to you.
The discovery of a man stalking her upstairs neighbor dramatically shifts the focus of the Carmen Smith murder investigation.
Law enforcement focused very quickly on wanting to find out where he was and to talk to him about his situation and talk about what he had been doing. Eventually, police located him at his parents' house.
He's kind of a weird and awkward guy and troubled, it seemed, you know, from all indications, and yet very intelligent.
His statement was he didn't even know where Lottie lived, so he denied any involvement in the case.
Did you know about this woman?
I never even heard about it till you guys told me about it.
Did you kill Carmen Smith?
No.
Did you stab her son repeatedly with a knife?
No.
Daker tells a different story about his relationship with Lottie.
Lottie had always said that it was a platonic relationship. Mr. Daker claimed the opposite. He claimed that he had been in a romantic relationship with her for some period of time.
Well, Lottie's telling me one thing, you're telling me another. So I don't know who's telling the truth about how this relationship actually was going on.
She denies it completely, but we've had a complete sexual romantic relationship.
With these situations, the cases can be very difficult to prove because it's a he said, she said kind of situation.
Daker also claims he has an alibi for Carmen's murder.
He claimed that he was home all day, that he was playing computer games with friends. It was a game that required that you play over a modem, that you had to use a home phone.
I know I was home, and I was playing the set. Talk to Colin. I'm not worried.
When we did finally speak to his friend, yes, indeed, he said that he had been playing this game with Mr. Daker.
His alibi appears solid, and a fundamental question still remains.
Why Carmen Smith? What's his motive to cause any injury or the death of Carmen Smith? Everything that we looked at in the case told us that Carmen and Daker probably wouldn't know each other if they saw each other on the street.
Detectives turn their attention to other men in Carmen's life.
We talked to family members about her lifestyle and people that she was seeing, people she had dated before. Carmen had just turned 30 years old, a very beautiful young lady. The police wanted to find out a little bit more about their background to see if they could have been a person capable of doing this to her.
They learn about one individual Carmen had been spending a lot of time with lately.
John was in communication with her. I believe he knew about her flight that weekend.
John lived not too far away. He knew her routines, her schedules.
He knew where she lived.
John is brought to the station for questioning.
When you interview someone, you're looking for a number of tells. Body language is just one of them, and it's a very small part. There's certain very basic defensive positions people take when they are not sure, when they feel threatened by the question. The crossing of the legs, the crossing of the arms. Will they look you in the eye when they're talking to you?
When John was interviewed, he acknowledged his attraction to Carmen Smith. He acknowledged that they had been out. He talked about Carmen had confided in him. Carmen hadn't been divorced that long, and guys are stupid. We are what we are. So could there have been some jealousy that maybe she was seeing somebody else? Yeah.
Detectives need to uncover exactly where John was the morning Carmen was attacked.
The alibi that he provided wasn't anything that really could be substantiated because he was alone. So that makes it difficult. You can't say, okay, this person's here, they're clocked in at work, other people saw them, or they're shopping and they have a receipt, or there wasn't anything like that available. So the lack of alibi was a concern.
Without a clear alibi, it becomes a question of motive.
This was not a chance murder. This was not a quick murder. This was a very deliberate act.
There was nothing about him that would suggest that he was controlling and possessive and would be angry about anything that was going on in her life. Again, there was, do you like somebody? Yeah. Do you want them to see somebody else? No. Would you kill him over it? No. He's not that kind of guy. It was pursued, it was looked at, and in the course of all that, it dropped out.
For detectives, this means a disturbed killer is still walking the streets of East Cobb.
On violent crimes, you certainly want to find who's responsible and get them locked down.
If you talk to most law enforcement professionals involved in working homicides, most of them would probably tell you that they expect that they're going to be able to solve their case quickly and be able to make sure that you can bring justice to your victim and make sure that the general public is protected from future crimes. One of the frustrating parts, though, is you don't have that crystal ball at the time to know whether this is a case that's going to go cold. I want to, as a personal matter and professional matter, make sure that I've done everything that I can to bring justice to Nick and to bring justice to Carmen.
I remember the stress and I remember the focus in the office. This is it. You live it, you breathe it, you eat it, you sleep it or don't sleep it. I don't sleep much. It's an overwhelming burden. You have to do everything. And in order to do that, you have to live that case. That victim is mine. Carmen and Nicholas Smith are mine.
After weeks of waiting, they receive a key piece of evidence.
Probably one of the first times that law enforcement had obtained phone records in a case like this.
Remember, in 1995, it was a very difficult task to figure out whose number was called.
Within the massive paper trail lies a shocking clue.
There were calls made from inside the home that day.
One call was placed from the downstairs portion of the house, Carmen's portion of the house, upstairs to Lottie's portion of the house. And the records clearly showed to us that this call was placed after she had been murdered.
Records show a call was made from Carmen's phone to the upstairs neighbor in the hours following her murder.
Because we knew the time of death was in the morning, this was a pretty significant piece of evidence.
Police believe the call, which came in at 11:32 a.m., suggests the killer must have had a connection with someone upstairs.
When you're looking at a piece of evidence, your gut leads you often to the right conclusion. All you do is follow the evidence, follow the phone calls.
We've got a guy, a documented stalker.
We really needed to take another look at this guy, Mr. Daker. No other perpetrator in the world would take the time to not only remain in a crime scene, but to be so obsessed with the person upstairs that they're gonna make that phone call. He already demonstrated that he is incapable of controlling himself in terms of the harassment and intimidation. He had continued to stalk Lottie, continued to contact her against her will.
Believing Daker poses a threat, detectives act swiftly.
It became clear that law enforcement could prove several counts of aggravated stalking here in Cobb County. A decision was made to arrest him for those counts against Lottie in the hope that they could further their investigation.
There was never a, we can't get him for this, so let's get him for this. The aggravated stalking was an obvious crime, and it's a dangerous crime.
He was brought to the police station. He continued to deny knowing Carmen.
As part of his arrest, Daker provides blood and tissue samples. Police also execute a search warrant of his home.
You can't crawl inside somebody's mind and see what they were thinking at the time they committed these very horrible acts. But you can sort of get a glimpse of it by understanding what their lifestyle's like and what they were involved in. In his house, there were thousands of images of pornography that were found on a laptop. A lot of the images involved binding up and torturing women, which matched almost identically to the type of crime that we were dealing with. We found some email correspondence in his inbox where he had apparently asked for books about some really terrifying things. How to break into houses, how to kill people without joy. One of the books in particular talked about how you could effectively use an ice pick as a weapon to control your victim. We did find ice picks that he used routinely to clean his paintball guns, and some knives that were the same brand as the broken knife blade that was left at the crime scene. So he had access to the type of weapons that were clearly used on Carmen.
In the search of Wasim's room, there was a safe. When I was 17 years old, I didn't have a safe because my mom wouldn't let me hide anything. But there's a safe. And when it was open, there's a handcuff box, and it's empty. Where are the handcuffs?
The most telling evidence is found discarded in his room.
A couple of letters that were found in a trash can. He was writing about his thoughts about Lottie, one of which was particularly chilling. It was ripped up, where he closed the letter by basically saying that he had a foolproof plan to get back at Lottie, but that he was going to somehow let her live.
My impression is that he wanted to cause Loretta Spencer Bites more pain than she could tolerate without putting physical pain on her.
You start to understand that this might be a case of displacement, where an offender is clearly taking out his anger against one person and using it against somebody else.
On September 19, 1996, Daker is found guilty of stalking Loretta Spencer.
He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The investigation never stopped into the murder of Carmen Smith and the assault on Nicholas. Every step of this case, every piece of evidence, every thought, every circumstance went right back to Wasim Daker.
We never quit. These cases are not wasting away in some old file cabinet. These are always fresh on our minds.
But in 2005, Wasim Daker is nearing the end of his prison sentence for the aggravated stalking.
Make no mistake about it, Mr. Daker is not your average criminal. He is an extremely intelligent individual, and that makes him that much more dangerous.
He's not going to be told no by a judge or a doctor or anybody else. He's going to do whatever the hell Wasim Daker wants to do.
You certainly want to keep that individual off the street. There's always a sense of urgency, and we're going to bring you to justice.
Police are convinced Wasim Daker is the man responsible for the murder of Carmen Smith and the brutal assault of her young son. Now, they have to prove it.
He's a dangerous individual. Once he was released from prison, he's going right back to Lottie.
So he was released in 2005. He was out amongst us.
There's extra pressure and stress to try to grab him up. Our best evidence in this case was hair evidence that we hadn't been able to do anything with.
It was crucial where this evidence was located. It wasn't just found at some area of the crime scene. It was literally recovered from the body of Carmen Smith underneath her shirt.
By 2009, DNA testing has dramatically improved.
Some of the hair evidence that was preserved on the slides from 1995 had biological material, root. We sent those hairs to a private company in Texas so that they could obtain a profile.
Detective John Dawes delivers the sample personally.
It was quite a day leaving Atlanta before daylight, maintaining the evidence with me in a hotel room that night, knowing the importance of it and the value of it. And it worked. December 31st of 2009, I got a call from the scientist that it was Wasim Daker. And the percentages that it might have been a duplicate profile of his DNA were so ridiculous. There aren't that many people in the world.
Between this evidence and the phone call made from inside the apartment, detectives know Daker's original alibi was manufactured.
We have overwhelming circumstantial evidence. Now we have DNA. Let's go.
Using the reconstructed timeline, they can now prove he's the killer.
He waited until the children got on the school bus. He waited till Lottie went to work.
He entered the home at some time in the morning.
He knew how to avoid detection.
We know that at some point she was placed in handcuffs. We know that he stabbed her in the back with an ice pick. There were deep ligature marks that were left on her neck, clearly showing that she died of ligature strangulation.
He went there to commit a heinous assault. He's absolutely a conscienceless, unremorseful killer. And then to sit with her dead body for hours, relishing in what he's accomplished, to the point that the 5-year-old son comes home. And to grab him around the neck and stab him repeatedly in the chest.
On September 13th, 2012, Wasim Daker, acting as his own lawyer, pleads not guilty.
Nick testified that he took his mother from him and that he was always going to have Wasim's rage stamped on his chest, basically, in the form of those stab wounds.
Nick grew out of being a victim right there that day on the stand in the trial of his mom's murder and his assault.
It was just a pit in your stomach, praying that the jury was going to see it the same way that we did.
After a 2-week trial, it takes the jury just 4 hours to reach their decision.
The guilty verdict was a huge relief. It was a relief to my team. It was a relief to John Dawes, and to be able to look Nick in the eyes and be able to confirm for him that we had finally done what we hadn't been able to do for so terribly long, which is to not only hold the person accountable that took his mother away from him, but to hold the person accountable that had dramatically impacted his life.
That is the best thing that I'll ever receive from a case that we got through.
Wasim Daker is sentenced to life in prison, plus 47 years. His latest appeal was denied in 2016 by the Georgia Supreme Court.
This case was an honor and a privilege to be a part of. It was sheer effort, but the best of some of the hardest working people that you've ever seen.
And I believe that's our role as homicide investigators, is to speak for the dead, because, you know, damn it, there's a story to be told. And just because you took somebody's life doesn't mean we're not going to tell it.
She was so nice and so open-hearted and generous that these monsters took advantage of that.
A brutal killing.
There was blood spattered all over the walls, floor, bed, everywhere.
Identifying her body was one of the most difficult things that I've had to do in my life.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
He was stalking her. He would not leave her alone. He was constantly calling her.
You have another woman involved, maybe seeking revenge.
He was an absolute animal who now, I hope, burns in the hottest part of hell.
The truth will be revealed.
You know, he kind of had a smile on his face, and he called it the perfect murder.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Clinton, Louisiana. A tiny town just north of Baton Rouge. Home to less than 2,000 residents.
Clinton has a reputation for being a very comfortable, very safe, small town.
It's really a quiet parish with a low crime rate.
It has a small downtown, but once you leave the town limits, it's pretty much a rural area.
On the morning of June 26, a woman co-workers called and asked that we go check on her.
The woman is 42-year-old Janora Gillery.
They were just concerned because normally she kept in constant contact with them.
When our first deputy arrived at the house, the side door by the carport was partially opened and had a dog tied up under the steps. Once he made entry into the house, when he walked around the corner, he looked in the room, and that's where he found Miss Gillery, covered with blood and on the floor.
The room was in total disarray. Lamp had been shattered. There were what appeared to be bullet holes in the window. There was blood spattered all over the walls, floor, bed, everywhere. She had a nightshirt or a nightgown that was pushed up. It was a scene of gruesome violence.
The job of finding Janora's killer falls to sheriff's investigator, Don McKee.
This case was really my first homicide to work, and the scene was really bad. Miss Gillery died from the beating. She'd also been shot several times, and she had also been stabbed several times. You just have to do your job and try to put it to the side.
His first task is to notify Janora's family.
Disbelief was my reaction when I heard. When we arrived, we had to face the crime scene. Her father and brother remained outside of the home. I went in and ultimately had to identify the body for the family. It was one of the most difficult things that I've had to do in my life. If you walk into a room, you see someone and you can recognize them within a millisecond. I had to spend about 3 minutes, 4 minutes comparing things like her lips and the finger structure. And by taking little bits and pieces like that, only then could I make a definite identification. Janora was a very intelligent, very attractive woman, very, very full of life. She was an administrator for a major insurance company. She worked very hard, enjoyed living in the country, and she remained true to those country roots all of her life.
You never heard anything bad about Miss Janora. What we learned is she would help anyone that needed help and do whatever she could for people, and she was just a caring person.
She just couldn't say no to human or animal. I think Janora just couldn't pass up an animal that needed help. That's why she ended up with, 20 or 25 dogs and a giant kennel on her property. That's why she ended up with, horses.
Many of her animals were strays, particularly the dogs and cats. She purchased the horses, enjoyed riding and enjoyed being just around those horses.
In order to find the killer, Detective McKee begins the difficult task of reconstructing the last 24 hours of Janora Gillery's life.
When you're building timelines, you have a very open mind. A timeline can be filled in by almost any kind of information. You don't know how far back you have to go until you find somebody to fill the puzzle in.
The only timeline we had was when she left work early that Friday to come home. Her co-worker advised us that she did leave early that Friday. It was shortly after noon. The autopsy shows that the homicide could have happened anywhere from noon on Saturday to noon on Sunday.
With a wide window of time for her murder, Detective McKee looks to the scene for clues that may lead him to the killer.
There's blood by the drawer where the knives were. There's blood on the counter. I think at one time she tried to get a knife or something to defend herself with. The pattern from the side door showed spots of blood to where she ran towards the front door. There was keys in the front door. It was a deadbolt lock. There was blood on them keys that indicated she was trying to get out of that door, that she was trying to run away. Her phone was knocked off the hook. There was blood on the wall there.
Despite the violence, there is no physical or forensic evidence pointing to a potential suspect.
There was a gun involved, there was a knife, and some type of blunt object. And none of those were found on the scene, so the perpetrator took them away with them. The fact that no murder weapons were left on the scene means that the perpetrator at least had the presence of mind to try and cover their tracks.
There was no forced entry, so she had to open the door. The dog was tied up, and we learned real quick that would have never happened with Miss Gillery.
It appeared that someone had secured that dog while they made entry into the house.
The indications that we got was basically that she was killed by someone she knew.
Police begin to canvass the area to see if anyone saw or heard anything during the window in which Janora was killed.
Miss Gillery had very few neighbors right in the area, and the closest neighbor was across the street from her, and that turned out to be the Skippers.
Amy and Philip Skipper live with their newborn and a young man they had taken in.
Philip Skipper was the guardian or sort of de facto stepfather to a teenage boy named John Ballio. The Skippers and John Ballio were very cooperative. Philip Skipper said that he and John Ballio had been helping a neighbor move on Saturday and didn't arrive home until late that night. Philip said that he, his wife, and child were at the Skipper's trailer across the street after that, and they didn't hear anything.
Amy was emotionally destroyed, talking about how well Miss Gillery had treated them and how much Miss Janora had done for them and helped them out.
The relationship between Janora Gillery and the Skippers was close. They saw each other all the time, and Janora did whatever she could to help them out because they were poor. They initially lived in this really dilapidated trailer. She helped them get a newer one. She sometimes bought things for them, especially for their baby, diapers, some baby food, formula. She even decided to go ahead and name her good friends across the street as the beneficiaries of a life insurance policy.
They would also, in return, do things for Miss Gillery that when she would have to go out of town for her job, they would take care of the animals.
She gave them money. They cleaned her house. They were in constant communication all the time.
During their interview with the Skippers, they never could come up with anybody to lead us to anybody that would do anything to Miss Janora. They advised that she very seldom had company, so they was unable to give us any names or anywheres to look for a suspect.
Despite their willingness to talk, something seems off.
Philip Skipper was just overwhelmingly trying to assist the family. He talked good about Miss Janora, but then he would constantly go to, I'll clean it up, I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll take care of the dogs, I'll take care of the animals. I've never seen somebody that was willing to help as much as Philip was. I felt that they knew something.
Detective McKee observes something that needs explaining.
We'd noticed some scratches on his arm. He said that him and his stepson were wrestling in the yard. And John did have scratches on his arms also, and his story was the same as Philip's story, which was really suspicious to me.
So they need to look at the neighbors and see if they're actually involved in it.
Bloody scratches on the arms of two of Janora Gillery's neighbors has police questioning if they were involved in her murder.
In a case like this, in which the victim struggles with the assailant, it would not be unusual that there be some blood from the victim scratching the assailant.
When pressed for an explanation, Philip makes an unusual admission.
He said that Miss Gillery had argued with the Skippers due to the fact that a dog had killed one of the Skippers' goats. And they was blaming it on Miss Janora's dog. And Miss Janora was sure it was not her dog. She had told the Skippers that they was no longer welcome to come to her house, that she would stay to herself, they needed to stay to themselves.
The argument took place just 1 month prior to her death.
Tension between neighbors, that's always kind of a red flag that goes up. But you need something in a murder, you know. Why would you do it? You need a motive, an opportunity. They had an opportunity, they were right across the street. They had a semi-motive that was a tension. But it's kind of like cutting the arm that feeds you. You know, she was helping them a lot. You know, why murder her?
They ask both Philip and his stepson, John, to take a polygraph.
In some cases, when you're investigating murders, you will use a polygraph as an investigative aid. It is to send messages to the person. You don't believe them. Why would you ask them to take a polygraph otherwise?
My advice to anybody who's asked to take a polygraph is say, sure, I'll take it. If you're an innocent person, the police are going to say, well, you're no longer a suspect, so take the polygraph.
Both Philip and John Ballio had no problem with taking a polygraph. The questions related to the case were, did you kill Miss Janora Gillery? Did you stab or shoot Janora? Can you take us to the gun that was used to kill Miss Janora? Both Philip and John Ballio passed. Once they passed, we had no other evidence to pin them to the murder.
Detectives need to find who Janora might have been in contact with. in her last 24 hours. Her co-workers provide the name of a recent boyfriend, Tommy Alexander.
Basically, they met through horses. Janora owned horses, Tommy Alexander owned horses. They met at the feed store in the nearby town. They started dating. They dated a little while. Then that ended when Janora found out that Tommy Alexander had another girlfriend. That opens up all kind of possibilities. I mean, you have another woman involved. Maybe Tommy would be mad about something. Maybe the other woman would be seeking revenge.
It's a crime of passion. People act without thinking. If you can show me a love triangle, I'll tell you have a potential homicide on your hands.
They bring Tommy Alexander in.
Tommy, when talking to him, he was calm. He was saddened by Miss Janora's death. He was saying how good of a person she was, just like everybody else we had talking to had said.
They question him about his most recent interaction with Janora.
Tommy Alexander told the detectives that he had spoken to Janora on Wednesday. They had seen each other. One was transferring horses to another. There were some papers to sign. So that was the last time he spoke to her, was on Friday.
Police must confirm his whereabouts during the time in which Janora was killed.
He had an alibi. He said he had been home all weekend with his girlfriend, which turned out to be true. She backed him up on that story. They were able to eliminate him in the investigation as a possible suspect.
He was really upset. Nothing to raise an eyebrow to think that he was involved in the homicide. Based on his story and the lack of evidence we had, we really had to start looking other places.
So it was going back, did she have anything out of the ordinary happening in her life?
Looking for answers, they turned to Janora's phone records.
We had a phone call that would have matched the last day that Miss Janora was alive. We traced it, we tracked it. It was associated with someone named Steve Williams.
The call was placed at 8:27 a.m. that Saturday, potentially making Williams the last person to speak to Janora alive.
Steve Williams was a Baton Rouge police officer. He pestered her at work to the point where she eventually agreed to go on a date with him. When she got back, she told her coworkers that she never wanted to see him again. She said he was too free with his hands. He kept grabbing her and touching her, and she didn't really want to see him anymore. At the time all this was going on, Steve Williams was actually married. He and his wife had a child, but apparently that didn't stop his romantic pursuits in other areas.
Janora's friends say he was relentless.
We were told that Steve Williams basically was stalking her, was real aggressive towards Miss Janora. Steve had been coming to her work in Baton Rouge and had actually made everybody in the building feel uncomfortable about the way he would show up to meet Janora when she would get off from work, show up at lunchtime. He was really aggressive towards Janora, trying to get her into a relationship with him.
The thing about stalking is there is an obsession, and he's demonstrating that with multiple phone calls, showing up just unexpectedly. So if he's obsessed with her, he may not be satisfied with the level of attention that he's getting from her, and he may progress that to aggression.
That was a huge red flag for the investigators. I mean, when you have a domestic situation like that, it really puts them on high alert. So they really began to focus on Steve Williams. You know, you have a sort of a jilted boyfriend who keeps bothering her, who keeps wanting to come by and see her. And all of a sudden, he's going to come by, whether she wants it or not, and then she's never seen again.
Baton Rouge police officer Steve Williams, who once dated homicide victim Janora Gillery, is now the lead suspect in her murder.
Police officers don't like investigating other police officers. Something you want to shy away from. You know, they don't like to think that another cop would be involved in some kind of criminal activity. But cops generally have a very intimate knowledge of, you know, law enforcement and how crimes are committed. So a police officer can be a more wary suspect because you would presume that he or she knows what not to do, what evidence to make sure it doesn't get left. So they make sort of dangerous criminals. They're so knowledgeable about the investigative process itself.
His potential involvement comes down to the call he made to her the day she died.
When the detectives questioned Steve Williams, you know, of course, he denied having anything to do with Janora's death. He said that they were friends, and he resented the fact that he was characterized as sort of a stalker. He said that he did call her a few times a week, but, you know, just to do some friendly chit-chatting.
They narrow in on the one call they're interested in.
Steve admitted to calling her Saturday.
He said that although he did call her, he was going to come by Saturday, he never made it. So the detectives were sort of left with, you know, is this guy telling the truth? He very well may have been the last person, you know, to see her alive. I mean, he could be the killer.
Police learn of another call between Steve and Janora, witnessed by her colleagues.
So the Friday before Janora was killed, Steve Williams called her at work. Her co-workers said they engaged in an argument on the telephone, and then she left work. So, you know, whether that argument played into her leaving work early or it was strictly just to go do some chores around her house, you know, nobody really knows. But there was a verbal altercation on the phone, and then later Steve Williams says that he was going to come by. So, you know, from the investigator standpoint, you know, this is looking more and more like he's the #1 suspect in her murder.
They interview his co-workers and discover a disturbing trend.
Steve Williams had a reputation, a history of this sort of overly aggressive pursuit of whatever love interest he had. In the Baton Rouge Police Academy, there was a female recruit who made the complaint against him.
We interviewed his co-worker, and she was able to give us some information about how Steve Williams acted towards her.
She said he kept harassing her, would call her at home, off duty, about academy class type business, but she was in a relationship with somebody and she didn't want him making these late night calls.
Based on the information we got about Steve Williams going after her, it was basically the same way that he went after Miss Janora. So it showed a pattern of aggressiveness and jealousy.
We look at the past to look to the future. People are creatures of habit. So it's an indicator. It's patterns of behavior and tells, in and of himself, is not evidence. But as a trained investigator, you're looking for that because that will lead you to ask certain questions.
So he had a reputation for this kind of behavior. And of course, the police have to look at this and say, well, this time did it go even a step further? Did he kill her?
Believing Steve Williams had both motive and opportunity, they bring him in again, this time for a polygraph.
Anytime you investigate a police officer, you got to be careful because you don't know their state of mind. You're telling this man that his career as a police officer is about to come to an end because he's suspected in a murder. He didn't do good on his polygraph.
His results indicated that he was lying about one or more things in his answers.
And that's when he advised us that he was not going to talk to us anymore without a lawyer. So we obtained a search warrant and went to his residence. We actually seized his police car and had it towed to the crime lab for processing. What we was hoping to find was a murder weapon or some bloody clothes or any other type of evidence that might help us in the investigation. But unfortunately, we came up with no weapon that would have matched what we was looking for.
A drop of Janora Gillery's blood in Steve Williams's car or house would have convicted him. I mean, there's really no other excuse for that.
I really thought that Steve Williams was the man I was after. Just did not have enough to do anything with.
All you have is odd circumstances, him making a phone call, leaving a message, him sort of harassing her at work, but, you know, none of that's a crime, and they couldn't charge him.
That's really when the case came to a complete stop. We just had nowhere else we could follow up to.
Not every homicide case can be solved or will be solved. We have to be realistic. You do as much as you can to the best of your ability. You will get frustrated.
In this case, they talked to the co-workers, they talked to the neighbors, they talked to everybody that they could find, but they didn't have any physical evidence or a real motive.
I was getting aggravated because I wanted to solve it, and I done told Mr. Gillery that we was gonna solve it. And there's nothing I could tell the family, except for we're working on it. We're waiting for a break.
Janora's death took a tremendous toll on her family. Illnesses, divorce, directly resulted from this murder. But this matter never went cold for Investigator Mackey. We trusted Mr. Mackey tremendously. We knew that Mackey was doing a great job.
Over a year after Janora's death, police receive a call that sets the investigation back into motion.
The detectives got a tip from another jurisdiction. They went over to interview this alleged witness, a guy named Donnie Fisher.
Initially, what indicated to the police officers that Donnie Fisher may know something about a homicide in East Feliciana Parish.
He had given some details of the murder. I knew exactly what murder he was talking about. When interviewing Donnie, he at first didn't want to cooperate. What I done was I laid pictures of the crime scene and got on to him and said, this woman did not deserve this. She was a good woman. After I showed him that, he told us what was told to him.
He was friends with Philip Skipper and John Ballio.
Fisher says Janora's neighbors took him to her house after the murder.
Donnie Fisher told us then Miss Janora's family paid them to clean up the house.
Philip Skipper told me, what would I think if I killed Gillery? And I kind of took it as a joke at first.
And what did he tell you?
You know, he kind of had a smile on his face, and you know, I knew. He didn't have to just come out and say it. I knew in my mind. He called it the perfect murder.
And then he said that John Ballio had taken him into the house and told him step by step how they killed Miss G.
When he was taken to the house, what was he saying?
He was saying where the blood was. He was telling me everything.
If Fisher is telling the truth, this means Skipper and Ballio lied about where they were the night she died.
Fisher started giving details of the murder that he would not have knowledge of.
And one of them held the dog back, knocked on the door, hit her with a baseball bat, knocked the teeth out, cut her up, shot her in the head.
Donnie Fisher implicated Philip Skipper, Johnny Hoyt, Lisa Hoyt, and John Ballio.
This information adds 2 new names to the investigation: Philip's sister, Lisa Hoyt, and her husband, Johnny.
That's the first time we heard of Johnny Hoyt's name was when we interviewed Donnie Fisher.
Johnny Hoyt was kind of a stocky guy. He was kind of a bigger built, muscular type guy.
So you have this little tight group of people here, and the statement from Donnie Fisher implicated them all in the murder.
Donnie continues, telling police of Philip's admissions.
Did he say who cut?
He didn't say, he just said we.
Did he say who shot?
He just said we. It was a gang. It's not, they're like one people, okay? He said it's a thrill. That's what he told me. It was a thrill. He says it's the best feeling you'll ever have.
The story that he told, it was no doubt in my mind that we was going after the right people this time.
But without any physical evidence, they need to find another way to prove beyond a doubt that the 4 people Fisher has named are responsible for the murder.
You play on what feelings of remorse they might have. You want to get them to confess. And they don't have to confess, of course. They can just ask for a lawyer and the whole thing's over.
Brought into custody, Philip Skipper, Lisa Hoyt, and Johnny Hoyt all refused to cooperate.
John Ballio was the last person that we was able to talk to. It was a long interview. It was a couple hours probably. And finally he just broke.
Philip and Lisa, me and Johnny. We was going over there to see Miss G. They wanted me to watch them kill Miss G and hold the dog.
Did they say why they wanted you to watch?
It would be my true test of brotherhood.
A year after the murder of Janora Gillery, police have damning testimony from a 15-year-old who was witness to the crime.
John Ballio basically told us it was part of my initiation to get into the Brotherhood, was to go and participate and watch them kill Miss G. The Brotherhood was a white supremacist group. It was a hate group, is what it was.
And the initials for the Brotherhood was GFBD. God forgives, the Brotherhood doesn't. And, you know, as with all gangs, they're created to intimidate, to scare people.
All right, what happens? When we got there, Lisa walked up to the door and knocked on it and told Miss G that she needed some money to get the baby some diapers. And when she did that, Johnny punched Miss G. The first time she got stabbed, Lisa stabbed her. And then Johnny stabbed her, and Philip. They all took turns.
When did they shoot her? Before they stabbed her or after they stabbed her?
Before they stabbed her, they was making me watch, saying that it would show if I was a true brother or not, or whether or not I could keep my mouth shut.
Ballio explains this wasn't the only motivation.
He said Miss Gillery had a life insurance policy that was signed over to Philip Skipper and Amy Skipper.
The growing fight over the goat and the dog incident made Philip Skipper realize she's going to change the beneficiary on that policy or just outright cancel it, and we need to get over there and kill her so that we benefit from that policy. Two people who live in a trailer out in the middle of the woods, $25,000 was pretty significant. I think race and money played kind of equal parts. If Janora Gillery had been a white woman, I doubt they would have killed her.
I think John finally broke because he did feel bad about what happened. I think he realized what he had done was wrong.
I thought it was pretty sick myself. I was crying, but I was also just trying to shut up so they wouldn't get worried about me telling them. Because they said if I ever said anything, they'd kill me.
Armed with Ballio's confession and a complete understanding of the timeline, detectives now have enough to press charges against the 4 conspirators.
Miss Gillery left work that Friday to come home. Saturday, Philip Skipper, Lisa, and Johnny Hart, they had been popping pills, drinking all day long.
They determined that they wanted to go over there and initiate John Ballio into the Brotherhood.
Midnight, 1 o'clock, they all go over there. Lisa knocked on the door. When Miss Gillery came to the door, Johnny Hart punched her. They chased her in the bedroom. That's when they took turns shooting her, stabbing her, and then beating her with the bat. After they killed her, they went back to their house. They burned their clothes and shoes. Gun used, they said they threw it off in the river.
The district attorney charges all 4 suspects with murder.
Lisa Hoyt pled guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
Philip Skipper went to trial, was found guilty. 2nd-degree murder, he got life in prison. Johnny Hart also went to trial and was found guilty and is serving life in prison.
John Ballio cooperated. He was a juvenile when this occurred, and he pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to juvenile life.
Janora was so nice and so open-hearted and generous that these monsters took advantage of that.
It is a dumb dog that bites the hand that feeds it. And Philip Skipper was a dumb dog, a swine, an absolute animal, who now, I hope, burns in the hottest part of hell.
I feel a lot better now on this case that we done our best. The DA done his job, and we got justice for the family. And I feel that the family's happy, so if they're happy, I'm happy.
We work for their families. I just want to make them sleep better at night. You know, they need to put this behind them.
And I would not want us to forget the life, the lively, happy, smiling, beautiful person that Janora was.